Okay, Don, the war for Europe and North America. So we're learning about how the Allies coordinate the war effort amongst themselves, the British, the Americans, and the Russians, and how this is going to kind of culminate in the defeat in Germany and Italy. And that's our second question, is how does the United States or the Soviet Union defeat Germany in the Second World War?
So what we want to keep in mind, as we mentioned in previous sections, is at the beginning of the war, the United States really had to ramp up production for this war. But they didn't just have to ramp up production for this war, they had to determine, okay, we're fighting a two-front war. What is the best way to fight a two-front war? And what the United States decided was the best way to fight a two-front war is to focus on the most dangerous enemy first. And to them, Germany and Hitler was the most dangerous enemy first. Not only did Hitler represent everything that is wrong in human nature, he was a danger to France, he was a danger to the United Kingdom, he was a danger to the USSR. And ideally, what FDR thought is if we could take out Hitler first, not only will we free France, the USSR, and the UK from this common enemy, but then the UK and the USSR specifically can help us fight Japan. So we decided to focus on Hitler in Germany first, and how are we going to take out Hitler in Germany? And in the Pacific, we began to give ground. We allowed Japan to continue to expand because the issue we dealt with was we didn't have the manpower in the Pacific and we didn't have the naval fleet in the Pacific needed to fight an adequate defense against Japan. So we needed to build that up before we could really go all in and fighting Japan.
And at the same time, Japan is bogged down in China. Japan doesn't use mechanized warfare, can't expand as quickly. Right? Japan's not coming in with large armored divisions, so we'll talk about all that. So we kind of saw there was a lesser threat.
And the only real American allied interest in the Pacific would be Australia and New Zealand, which Japan still had quite a ways to go until getting to those two islands, and America eventually prevents Japan from getting there. Whereas in Europe, France has already fallen, the USSR is bogged down in a bloody war against Hitler, and the UK is on the brink of disaster. So that seemed like the more imminent threat for the United States of America.
So another thing here, the production, is America going to be able to arm basically the entire armies of the United States, the UK, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and the USSR, and supply those armies? Another thing, are these totalitarian warriors, are these guys in Germany and Japan that have been bred since they were young children to be soldiers and fight and kill, going to be better than farm boys from Iowa and Kansas, right? How is this going to work out? These people that have been trained their entire lives to fight to these kind of volunteer armies of the United States.
Well, not only that, but their allegiance to their leaders plays a huge role. I mean, we know of numerous examples of German and Japanese generals committing suicide as opposed to facing the shame of telling the Fuhrer that they capitulated or telling the Emperor that they capitulated and gave up. And this is going to really come into play next unit when we talk about the war in the Pacific. The Japanese soldiers and generals truly fought to the death, feeling like dying for the Emperor would give them some type of everlasting life. This is a dangerous and difficult enemy to defeat.
Okay, so the first battle is the Battle of the Atlantic, right?
But it's not a real battle.
It's like a fake
battle.
Yeah. Right, so the big deal is the United States is separated by two oceans from the two places it needs to fight the wars. And Germany, just like in World War I, is using U-boats to kind of harass Allied shipping. Right? The U-boats cut off Great Britain, which is an island, from supplies, from food, from U.S. troops getting there. They're going to really slow down the ability of the Allies to mount an offensive in Europe.
Eventually what we'll do, after suffering massive losses, 681 ships in 7 months, eventually the Allied forces led by the United States will create a convoy system in which destroyers will surround the cargo shipment, and they'll use sonar to detect where the U-boats are and destroy the U-boats. Meanwhile, planes overhead will be using radar to detect where the U-boats are to destroy the U-boats. And this system became so incredibly effective that the Allied powers were destroying German U-boats quicker than the Germans could even make them. So eventually the U-boat threat dissipated and allowed the Allies to supply men and supplies to the UK and eventually eventually to mainland Europe, but it took a while for this to happen.
Yeah, we set up air bases on Iceland, and Newfoundland, and Greenland, and Scotland. They're able to cover pretty much the entire route of the North Atlantic, which really cut down the German ability to destroy the Allied ship.
And that brings us to the actual fighting itself. Now, before the United States officially invades Europe, we have to check in to see what's going on in Europe at this time. And the major conflict in Europe is actually between Germany and the USSR. As you guys know, Hitler turned his back on Stalin, invading the USSR, and as he did that, the Russians, or the Soviets, retreated, used a scorched earth policy just like they used on Napoleon many years prior, destroying everything in the Germans' path so they can't take advantage of it. And eventually the Germans ran low on oil and natural resources, so they went after the Volga River in the Caucasus Mountains. And specifically, they went after a city that used to go by Volgograd and now is going by Stalingrad. And what seemed like a very quick and easy victory for the Germans initially ended up being the most devastating battle both sides fought in throughout the war.
Yeah, the oil fields are down here, and Stalingrad's right here. So it wasn't totally necessary for the Germans to take Stalingrad, but Hitler kind of starts losing it and is not really a great military leader. And instead of ordering his army to focus on capturing the oil fields, he wants to embarrass Stalin by taking the city that's named after him.
It's all ego. And not all ego. I mean, they wanted to take Stalingrad to keep, to keep a flow of soldiers and supplies, but a lot of it had to do with the ego of Hitler and the ego of Stalin to not give up the city.
Yeah. And that only cost millions of people.
Yeah, as you can see, the Soviets lost 1.25 million soldiers defending Stalingrad, a city that technically they really didn't have to defend if they didn't want to.
But this was the first major defeat a German army group suffered. The Soviets were able to encircle them. They captured around 100,000 German soldiers. I think only about 5,000 of them ever made it back to Germany, of the 90,000 people that were captured.
So the huge significance of this battle, the Germans lose over 300,000 men and innumerable amounts of money in supplies and weapons. And right now, beginning at Stalingrad, the Germans will begin to retreat and the Soviets will begin to push westward.
Okay, so Stalin, it was really the only one fighting Hitler. He was the only one with troops on the ground pushing back. So most of the German army is fighting Stalin. Stalin needs the Allies, the British and the Americans, to open up a second front and get German soldiers off the eastern front and fighting them. The problem was the U-boats were kind of blocking and hurting the Allied ability to really ramp up their base. And also, France was really well defended and didn't have the resources, the supplies, and the manpower to launch a cross-channel invasion into France.
Yeah, remember, France has been taken over by Germany at this point. So the Germans and Hitler really, like Mr. Manelsky mentioned, heavily defended these coastal regions. And while Hitler and the Germans were bogged down in Stalingrad, the Allies decided the best course of action for them, while it won't make Stalin very happy, is to in fact take an indirect route to Europe, invade northern Africa, defeat the German defenses in northern Africa, and come up through an invasion of Italy. So come up into Europe this way. Of course, Stalin's going to be angry. This is going to take a long time. It's not going to make the Germans allocate as much manpower. Meanwhile, Stalin was losing 1 million men in Stalingrad. So this is the very beginning of tension and frustration between the United States of America and the USSR.
And it's good for the United States Army because it does help them gain valuable experience. The first battle in Kazarine Pass, and the Americans really fight, they get absolutely crushed by Rommel and the German army in Tunisia. Right? It helps the American commanders learn how to fight this war, how to fight the Germans, and eventually they're going to move up into Sicily and Italy. Churchill was obsessed with this, called it the soft underbelly. Right? The Italian military is not exactly the most
come a long way since the glory of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, the wrong way. The wrong way. The Allies invade Sicily. Patton and Montgomery were able to take Sicily, a small island there. From Sicily, the Allies invade Italy from the south, which is kind of a risky strategy because Italy, while the army is really weak, the geography is very difficult. There's a lot of mountain ranges and rivers that make it very easy to defend. Once Italy is invaded, Italy actually drops out of the war. They arrest Mussolini. They find him hiding. He was dressed as like an old man or a woman or something.
Yeah, he was dressed in civilian's clothing. So basically what happened is Mussolini and the Italians capitulate. The king tells Mussolini, you've lost your power. And right as everything looks like the Allies are going to be able to march through Italy, Hitler's like, no. Sends 180,000 troops or a couple 100,000 German troops into Italy to defend Italy. He takes over Italy, puts Mussolini back in power, but over time, the Allies are able to fight off the Germans, although it's actually extremely brutal fighting and takes far longer than the Allies thought. After the Allies push through Italy, Mussolini tries to escape in civilian's clothes. He's arrested, he's shot, and then he's actually hung upside down in Milan Square. Hugely embarrassing for Mussolini and for Hitler too. And Hitler will keep this in mind because seeing Mussolini's body treated like this will make Hitler really think about his own death and what will happen with his corpse after he dies.
But again, this is basically an afterthought to the real battle, which is going to come in June 1944 when the Allies are finally able to launch a cross-channel invasion. Right, so they invade France in Normandy, right, which is actually a fake. They convinced the Germans they were going to invade at the Pas de Calais, which is actually the narrowest point in the English Channel. They had a whole fake army there of inflatable tanks and trucks, so the German planes would fly over, and they would take pictures, and it would look like there was all this stuff there, but it was really just balloons.
And interestingly enough, about the fake invasion, so the general in North Africa who became incredibly famous and scared the crap out of Hitler is General Patton. Hitler views Patton as the best general of the American or the Allied forces, and we actually put Patton in charge of the fake army to further convince Hitler it was coming. But Eisenhower, another unbelievably great general of the Allied forces, led the invasion of D-Day.
Right, and the Americans are able to push through. About a month later, they're kind of breaking out of Normandy. They crushed the German response and counterattacks. The Germans are falling back. The Germans have to give up Paris. Paris falls July-ish, early June.
Yeah.
And eventually, by the fall, we have kind of a short line of the Allies are pushing into Belgium and into kind of Alsace-Lorraine and kind of that territory that's kind of in between France and Germany.
And real quick, just to take a step back from the fighting, this is really important because there's an election coming up, and FDR is running for a fourth time. And because of this success, partly because of the success from the D-Day invasion in France, the American people decide, let's just, why stop a good thing? Let's go with FDR again. So he's elected a fourth time in the heat of all of this.
After the election in the winter, the Americans, they've kind of stopped. Eisenhower's advancing along a broad front. So he's pushing into the Netherlands, he's pushing into southern Germany, Belgium, he's pushing across the whole line. So the American line's a little thin. The Germans see an opportunity, counterattack, and this has become the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans are trying to drive a wedge in between the Allied armies and take the port of Antwerp, which would really mess up the Allied supply route. But the German tanks literally run out of gas.
And Patton's Third Army came up and supported the Allies, which is incredibly important too.
Saves the 100% Bestow, which if you've ever seen Band of Brothers, that's in there.
Yeah. But basically this is the end of the war, right? So Hitler tries one last counterattack to break the spirit of the Allies, and it looks like it's going to work at the Battle of the Bulge. But it doesn't, and the Allies are able to stand firm. At that point, the Allies begin to march on Berlin. The Soviets, as you can see on this map, are just overwhelming the Germans on the Eastern Front. And the Americans, the British, and the Soviets all meet Berlin in April of 1945. Adolf Hitler marries his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun. The next day, commits suicide because he's totally embarrassed and disgraced, sending a public message to the German people, of course blaming it on his generals and the Jews. Didn't learn much in 20 years.
May 8th, 1945, the Germans surrender. Formally, it's an unconditional surrender. Germany is split a bunch of ways between the French and the Allied. And here, if you see here, this is a map of the D-Day invasion. Normandy is right here. You You see the Americans had Omaha, here that's where the worst fighting was. The British and Canadians come over here in Juneau and Sword and Gold, and they kind of have an easier time invading. Cherbourg is the big opportunity there. That's a major port. Once the Allies take that, it goes very quickly. Battle of the Bulge. You see it's called the Bulge because of this bulge that is the German line.
And here's Bastogne, the area the Allies held through incredibly outnumbered. They held it anyway. But here's some information on the Bulge, some numbers. Germans lost 120,000 men. And the one thing that's really important about the Battle of the Bulge is the incredible amount of supplies the Germans lost during this battle. They were not able to replenish the tanks and the planes. This was truly a last-ditch effort for Hitler.
Once he lost it, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Quinn Hopkins.
Pay attention to this map at the end of the
The
war.
upper school office or
Allied armies are here in the green and brown dots.
Quinn Hopkins.
Soviet armies in the red dots.
Just overwhelming.
Yeah.
But anyway, like we mentioned, we got to finish this up. Hitler commits suicide to avoid disgrace. Germany gives its unconditional surrender in what's forever known
And
as
reminder
Day,
that blood
May
drive is
8th,
going on
just
in
last
Hall
week,
this time.
or earlier this week.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, if you have questions,
please report up to non-halted blood drive. Thank you.